Warmth was the first thing I felt. It surrounded me from chest to thigh, deep and soft, and for one foolish breath I wanted to remain exactly where I was. My first clear thought was embarrassingly simple. This feels good. Something breathed against my throat. I opened my eyes beneath 3 heavy fur blankets. A naked woman slept against my chest. One arm rested across the bandage around my ribs. A strong bare leg lay over mine, holding our bodies together beneath the furs. Long, pale blonde hair covered my shoulder and spilled across the folded hides beneath our heads. I had never seen her before. My own left arm was wrapped around her waist. For several breaths I remained completely still. Her skin was warm against mine. Each slow breath pressed her chest gently against my side, while her face rested below my jaw. The air outside the blankets was cold enough to whiten every breath. I turned my head toward a dying fire. A small iron stove glowed against the wall of a timber hunting shelter. Snow pressed against the shutter, and wind whispered through cracks between the logs. My torn clothing hung from wooden pegs near the stove. Her fur coat, hunting tunic, trousers, and underlayers hung beside mine. Everything was still damp. The woman had stripped us both before placing our bodies beneath the furs. Judging by the exhaustion across her sleeping face, she had stayed awake until she could no longer force her eyes open. I should have moved away. Instead, I allowed myself one more breath of warmth. Her fingers shifted against the bandage beneath my left ribs. Pain tore through the wound. The shelter vanished behind a silver cup rolling across a chapel floor. Less than a day earlier, Nerys Alden had placed that cup in my hand. She had worn white. I had expected to marry her. The wine numbed my tongue before the false priest finished blessing our union. My fingers opened without permission. The silver cup struck stone, bounced once, and rolled beneath the altar. Nerys watched it fall without surprise. The false priest kicked the base of the altar. A fitted stone panel dropped forward, revealing weapons hidden inside the hollow masonry. 2 royal attendants pulled loaded crossbows from the compartment. One witness seized a weighted net. The other lifted a hooked spear that had been concealed behind the altar cloth. Crown Prince Belden Rethmar stepped from the sacristy. I was Rathan Calm, 30 years old common-born and commander of 12,000 soldiers camped beyond the mountain ridge. At that moment, I could barely feel my right fingertips. "The still vein will reach your legs soon," Belden said. "Resisting will only make the end painful." I moved my left foot behind me and lowered my weight. "You brought 5 men. 5 inside." That was a better answer than I expected from him. Wind struck the stained glass windows. Snow hissed through cracks in the ancient stone. Highbreak Fortress stood beyond Kavren's northern frontier, deep inside mountains most southern nobles had only seen on maps. 3 days earlier, my army had broken an invading force at Spearwind Pass. Belden had arrived with the king's victory delegation soon afterward. His engineers claimed the chapel required repairs before it could safely hold the ceremony. My guards had searched every guest and inspected every visible part of the room. They had not known Belden's repair crews had hollowed the altar and resealed the stone around hidden weapons. Nerissa had drunk from the same decanter before handing me my cup. The wine itself was clean. A cloudy film clung to the inside of my silver rim where my mouth had touched it. The poison had been painted there. Belden had built his trap around the only person I had not inspected. The woman I loved. The net opened above me. I kicked the wedding table onto its side. Iron weights struck the oak surface and wrapped around its carved legs. The first crossbow fired. Its bolt punched through the tabletop and stopped a hand's width from my chest. I drove the table down the chapel aisle. The netman leaped aside. The false priest came behind me with a garrote. Thin wire touched my throat. He planted one knee against my back and pulled. The second crossbowman held his shot, waiting for the priest to drag my head into a clear line. I turned with the wire, my shoulder struck the priest's chest and pulled him off balance. I dragged him across my back, then dropped beneath the crossbowman's aim. The bolt entered the priest below one arm. He released the garrote and folded against me. I seized the front of his robe and threw him into the shooter. Both men crashed across the altar steps. The witness with the hooked spear attacked my right knee. I shifted half a pace. The hook caught my leather coat instead of the joint. He pulled with both hands. I released the coat clasp. His own strength dragged him backward into the overturned table. I reached him before he recovered. My left hand caught the spear shaft. My right tried to follow. The poison had already reached my shoulder. I twisted the weapon using one arm and drove its iron butt into his mouth. Teeth scattered across the chapel floor. He remained upright. My second strike crushed the front of his throat. The crossbowman near the doors abandoned his empty weapon and drew a short sword. The shooter beside the altar shoved the dying priest away and drew another. The netman freed his weighted mesh from the table. 3 men remained. They spread across the chapel and gave one another room. One watched my weakening right side. Another kept beyond my reach. The netman studied my legs and waited for the poison to advance. Belden had prepared them properly. Nerissa backed toward the altar. Small white stones glittered through her pinned brown hair. 3 hours earlier, she had entered my military camp claiming she could no longer wait to become my wife. Now she stood beside the man who intended to inherit the throne. How long? I asked. She touched the engagement ring on her finger. Since your spring campaign. I had spent spring besieging a fortified city 300 kilometers from home. Letters from Nerissa had arrived every week. She had written that she missed me. Belden had sent orders bearing his dying father's seal. They had shared a bed while I buried soldiers for their kingdom. What did he offer you? A crown. She removed the ring. The small sound it made against the altar hurt more than the poison. You could have ended the engagement and become the woman who rejected Cavern's greatest war hero. You preferred murder. I preferred becoming queen. She did not pretend fear had driven her. I respected the honesty more than the choice. Belden rested one hand against the altar. My father may not survive the month. Your soldiers trust you more than the royal court. They trust me to bring them home. That is precisely why you cannot return with them. My right leg began losing strength. The netman cast only one weighted edge this time. It wrapped around my left ankle. He pulled as both swordsmen attacked. I stepped toward him. The rope went slack. The sudden loss of resistance dragged the netman forward. One swordsman had already committed to a thrust. I caught the netman by his collar and turned him into the blade. Steel entered beneath his ribs. The swordsman tried to withdraw. The netman's body trapped his weapon. I drove the hooked spear through the swordsman's throat. The final assassin cut across my right forearm. The blade opened leather and skin. I felt pressure without pain. My hand hung uselessly beside me. He retreated before I could catch him. That made him the best of the 5. The wounded netman crawled toward the wall with one hand clamped over his side. The surviving assassin moved between Belden and me. He watched my dragging foot and refused to attack. 10 more seconds would give the poison what he wanted. I tore the weighted rope from my ankle and threw the hooked spear. He knocked it aside. I followed behind it. His sword cut toward my neck. I raised my numb forearm and accepted a shallow slice across the leather bracer. My left fist struck his jaw. His head snapped sideways. I caught his sword wrist and drove him into a cracked stone pillar. He recovered quickly and struck my ribs with his elbow. Pain burned through an old wound beneath my left side. I tightened my grip. His wrist struck the pillar once. The second impact loosened his sword. The third broke bone. He reached for a dagger with his free hand. I caught his falling weapon and pushed it through his chest. Belden attacked. Before the body reached the floor, his point came directly for my eye. He was faster than the court believed. I turned my head and trapped his wrist against my shoulder. My left hand closed around the dead assassin's dagger. Belden tried to pull free. I cut from the corner of his mouth to his cheekbone. Blood struck the altar. He screamed and dropped his blade. I reached for his throat. My right knee hit the floor. The still vein had reached the muscles above my hip. Belden staggered beyond my grasp with one hand covering his face. Nerissa ran toward me. Rathen? Her voice broke exactly as it had when she received news of my first serious wound 6 years earlier. For one heartbeat, she looked like the woman who had waited beside my hospital bed. She dropped to her knees and pressed herself against my chest. Her arms closed around me. I smelled the perfume she wore during summer dances at the palace. Then her dagger entered the old wound beneath my left ribs. She knew that scar. She had traced it with her fingers and called it proof that I always return. The narrow blade followed damaged tissue between 2 ribs. I twisted before it reached my lung. The point scraped bone and tore through muscle. Nerissa drove harder. Warm blood spread between us. I caught her throat with my left hand. Her pulse hammered beneath my fingers. She stared into my eyes from inches away. "You should have ended the engagement," I said. "You would have survived that." My grip tightened. The poison reached my forearm. My fingers failed before her throat broke. Nerys tore herself away. The wounded netman threw the remaining mesh over my shoulders. The chapel doors opened. 4 royal sappers rushed inside wearing heavy winter coats. One struck the back of my head with a weighted club. Light flashed across the room. I remained on one knee. The second blow drove me onto both. The third put the stone floor beneath my face. Belden stayed several paces away. He had finally learned caution. "Search him," he ordered. Every seam. The sappers removed my sword belt, coin pouch, boot knife, and every piece of metal large enough to cut a restraint. They tied my wrist and front with braided rawhide. A second loop pinned my elbows tightly against my ribs. Only after the knots were checked did Belden approach. Blood covered half his face. The wound would scar from his mouth to his cheek. "You ruined me," he said. I improved the outside. He kicked Nerys's dagger wound. Pain emptied my lungs. Belden kicked me again. I rolled onto my side and looked toward the woman I had intended to marry. My blood covered the front of her white dress. She wiped the dagger on my discarded coat. "Was this the future you wanted?" I asked. "It will be." The sappers began changing the chapel. They carried captured northern armor from the sacristy and dressed the dead attackers in enemy cloaks. Royal badges disappeared into a leather sack. Broken northern arrows were scattered around the altar. Lamp oil soaked the rear wall. A powder line ran toward the bridge supports. My 2 guards lay in the outer courtyard. One had been killed by an arrow through the neck. The other still gripped his sword beside 3 dead attackers, but a spear had entered beneath his arm. They had fought while Belden's men sealed the chapel. I memorized where they fell. The sappers looped a chain beneath my arms and dragged me through the snow. The paralytic had stopped my body from shivering. That frightened me more than the blood. Cavren lay weeks to the south among green fields, vineyards, and broad rivers where winter brought rain instead of snow. My army had marched north to stop the invasion before it reached those provinces. 12,000 soldiers celebrated beyond the ridge. Their campfires glowed through the storm less than 5 kilometers away. Every one of them believed I had entered Highbreak to marry the woman I loved. The bridge extended from the fortress toward a ruined watchtower on the opposite cliff. Blackwater moved 18 meters below. Snow-heavy pines grew from ledges along the gorge walls. 2 sappers carried powder casks toward the nearest support. By sunrise, part of the bridge would lie in the river. The burned chapel would contain dead enemy infiltrators. My guards would be honored for dying beside me. Nerissa would stand before my soldiers, wearing my blood and performing grief. The men dragging me stopped near the center of the bridge. They removed the chain from beneath my arms, but left both rawhide restraints in place. A sapper kept his sword against my neck. Belden approached with one hand pressed over his ruined cheek. "Your soldiers will receive an empty coffin," he said. "They will question you. Your captains will be separated before they finish searching the gorge." I believed him. Belden understood politics better than war. He would transfer my officers, split my companies, threaten families, and imprison the few men capable of uniting the rest. Cavren's army was loyal to me. Its soldiers also had wives. Children, parents, and homes within Belden's reach. Nerissa stopped beside him. Wind tore loose strands of brown hair from her wedding pins. I looked at her. "When I return, I kill you first." Her expression did not change. "You are poisoned, bound, and bleeding above a glacial river. I have returned from worse places. Not from this one." 2 healthy sappers lifted me beneath the shoulders. My boots scraped over ice. They pushed my upper body beneath the railing. The gorge opened below. Belden placed one boot against my chest. Fear remained beneath his anger. He would carry it until one of us died. He kicked. The bridge vanished above me. Wind tore at my clothes. The first pine branch struck my shoulder and broke beneath my weight. A second caught the rawhide pinning my elbows against my ribs. The loop snapped and stripped skin from both arms. I crashed through a shelf of snow along the cliffside. The slope threw me outward. I struck the river on my back. Cold erased pain breath and direction. The current rolled me beneath black water. I wore leather campaign armor instead of plate because Nerisse had requested a simple ceremony. That decision kept me close to the surface. My bound hands struck my chest. The wrist rope had frayed during the fall, but remained intact. I kicked with my left leg. The right responded slowly. My head broke through the surface. I inhaled air mixed with spray. The current drove a broken pine trunk into my chest. I folded both bound arms over it before the river carried the wood past. Rawhide cut deeper around my wrists. A jagged branch protruded from the trunk near my hands. I forced the frayed rope against it. The current pulled my body one way and the trunk another. The fibers stretched. I sawed them across broken wood until several strands snapped. My right hand came free. The remaining loop slid from my left wrist. The poison still weakened my fingers, but my elbows held the trunk. Snow and stone moved above me as the river curved through the gorge. My shoulder throbbed from the branches. Every breath stabbed through 2 cracked ribs. Nerisse's wound leaked warmth beneath the freezing water. The current would kill me before blood loss did. I forced my mind toward practical tasks. Keep my mouth above water. Protect the injured side. Release the trunk before it crushed me against stone. Reach the inside of the next bend. The gorge narrowed. The pine trunk struck a boulder and spun. I released it before the broken end drove into my chest. The current pulled me under. My shoulder scraped gravel beneath the surface. I kicked once. My face broke through beside a wall of dark stone. A smaller stream entered from the eastern bank. Steam drifted above its surface. The tributary remained cold, but it was warmer than the glacial river. Its current struck my side and pushed me toward the inside bend. My knee hit gravel. I drove both hands into the riverbed. The main current dragged my legs downstream. I pulled until my chest crossed the shallow shelf. Exposed roots hung above the bank. I caught one. The root bent beneath my weight. It held. I dragged one knee onto the gravel. The second followed. The river released me. Snow waited beyond the bank. I crawled into it because remaining beside the water meant dying where the current could reclaim me. The first pine stood 10 steps away. I reached it on my elbows. The second stood another 10. My left arm failed halfway there. My face struck the snow. Wind covered the blood behind me almost as quickly as I left it. I tried to rise. My body did not respond. A deep bark carried between the trees. The sound came again closer. I reached for a weapon that was no longer there. My hand closed around snow. A large gray hunting hound appeared beneath the pines. It approached with its head low and teeth visible. The animal smelled my blood, circled once, and barked toward the forest. Boots broke through the snow behind it. A woman emerged beneath a fur-lined hood. Long, pale blonde hair whipped across her face. A hunting bow rested in her left hand, and a broad knife filled her right. Bright blue eyes found the wound beneath my ribs. She lowered the knife toward my throat. Her gloved fingers touched the side of my neck. I tried to catch her wrist. My hand moved less than an inch. "Still alive," she said. For the moment, her gaze followed the bruises around my wrists. "Can you stand?" "No." "Good." A liar would have said yes. I remembered the knife sliding into its sheath. I remembered her rolling me onto my back and binding cloth around my side. A hide-covered sled appeared through the falling snow. She dragged me onto it alone. The shelter stood less than 300 meters uphill beneath a stone ledge. We nearly reached it before the crust over the warm tributary broke beneath her. She plunged into the water to her chest. The sled began sliding toward the current. She caught its rope with one hand and drove her knife into the snowy bank with the other. For several seconds, the river tried to take both of us. She pulled herself onto the ice soaked through every layer and dragged the sled the remaining distance. I remembered the shelter door opening. I remembered fire. Wet clothing left my body. Her wet layers fell beside mine. Bare warmth pressed against my chest beneath heavy furs. Then darkness returned. The memory released me inside the hunting shelter. My breathing had changed. The sleeping woman felt it. Her blue eyes opened. One hand caught my wrist where it rested near her waist. The other found the broad knife beneath the folded hide supporting her head. Its edge touched the side of my throat. Her body remained pressed against mine, but nothing in her expression was soft. "I spent the night keeping you alive," she said. "Do not make me regret waking beside you." I opened my hand. The knife remained in place. I was remembering. Your arm tightened. I was being stabbed. By me? Another woman. Her gaze moved toward the bandage around my ribs. The fiancée. You heard that. You complained about her between attempts to stop breathing. That sounded possible. I slowly removed my arm from her waist. Cold entered the space immediately. She watched my hands until both rested above the blankets. Only then did she lower the knife. You sleep-armed, I said. I sleep-armed beside strangers. Reasonable. She sat upright while keeping the upper fur wrapped around herself. Pale hair fell over one bare shoulder. The morning light revealed a narrow scar across her left eyebrow and exhaustion beneath her blue eyes. She appeared to be around 28. Her body carried the strength of someone who climbed mountains, drew heavy bows, and hauled game through deep snow. She was also beautiful. I noticed without forgetting the knife in her hand. What is your name? I asked. Yesra Dalin. Rathan. She waited for the rest. I gave her nothing. Isra reached for her clothes. She dressed beneath the fur first, then stood to pull on her leather trousers and thick hunting tunic. Her pale hair became a heavy braid down the center of her back. Why were we both naked? I asked. You saw the stream break beneath me. I remember pieces. Everything I wore was soaked. Your clothes were already frozen. The fire and heated stones were not warming you fast enough. So you used body heat. You stopped shivering and your breathing slowed. I used what I had. She fed another piece of wood into the stove. The hound helped with your feet. The gray animal remained curled near my legs. One ear lifted at the sound of its mention. You stayed like that all night? Moving, you opened the wound. Staying was simpler. She had saved my life before knowing my name. The people I had protected for 15 years had tried to erase me. Isra poured water into a clay pot and added smoked meat-crushed roots and several bitter leaves. The smell reached my stomach before the broth began to boil. I had not eaten since the morning before the betrayal. She filled a clay cup and knelt beside me. Drink slowly. The rim stopped a finger's width from my mouth. My muscles hardened. The silver cup rolled beneath the chapel altar again. Isra followed my gaze. Poison? Yes. She neither argued nor asked for trust. She raised the cup, swallowed, and handed it back. I accepted it. My left hand shook badly enough that she supported the bottom. The broth tasted of smoke salt and meat stretched painfully thin. Warmth spread through my chest. You measured this for more than one person, I said. I measured it for myself. You are a poor liar. I am an excellent hunter. It balances. I drank before she invented another explanation. My right fingers responded when I flexed them, though the smallest remained numb at the tip. The still vein was leaving my blood. It had not finished. Who tried to kill you? Isra asked. The crown prince. She sat back on her heels. Of Kavrin? Yes. And the woman? Nerys Alden. My former fiancée? Former? She stabbed me. I considered the engagement ended. That earned the smallest movement at one corner of her mouth. What did you do to the prince? Scarred his face. Enough to remember you? Enough to fear mirrors. Isra offered the cup again. I drank the remainder. How far did the river carry me? Less than 2 miles from Highbreak. You know the fortress. Everyone in this valley knows it. Nobody approaches the southern gorge after the first heavy snow. How far by land? 2 days in summer if the high trail remains clear. 3 with a loaded sled. 2 miles takes 2 days? The gorge cannot be crossed from this bank. The trail climbs east, circles the cliffs, and returns through the high pass. When does it open? Late spring. 4 months, perhaps 5. Belden had thrown me farther from home than he understood. There's another route. There was an eastern road. An avalanche destroyed half of it 8 years ago. Dire wolves took the rest. How far to Kavren's nearest province? 3 weeks with pack animals during summer. The capital lies another month south. My army is camped beyond Highbreak. They cannot reach this bank from above. They will search until Belden stops them. You believe he can stop 12,000 soldiers? He only needs to remove the officers they trust. Isra watched me over the rim of the empty cup. How many men have served beneath you? 12,000 in the northern force. More across the other armies. Then why are you here alone? Loyalty cannot climb a gorge it does not know exists. She placed the cup beside the stove. What is your full name? Rathan Calm. Her hand stopped above the firewood. Travelers carried military news even into forgotten mountains. You are the southern warlord. I was yesterday. They said you broke the invaders at Spearwind Pass. They counted their soldiers badly. They also said you killed an ogre commander after your sword broke. The ogre broke it. Isra studied the scars across my chest and arms. The notices made you look cleaner. The artist worked for the crown. I pushed the blankets aside. Isra's hand moved toward her knife. What are you doing? Testing my legs. They failed beside the river. I was poisoned then. You are still poisoned now. I placed both feet on the timber floor. My left leg held when I used the wall to stand. The right trembled beneath me. Pain tightened around my ribs, but the room remained level. I took one step. The second sent my knee toward the floor. Asra caught me around the waist and turned my fall away from the stove. She lowered me onto the furs without dropping either of us. You have your answer. I dislike it. She checked the bandage. Fresh blood had reached the outer cloth. You reopened the wound. It never closed. That was intentional. Bleeding through it was not. Isra removed the stained dressing. She cleaned the wound with warm water, replaced the cloth packed inside it, and wrapped my ribs firmly. She had left the lower edge open instead of trapping river dirt beneath stitches. You know wounds, I said. I know what happens when hunters ignore them. Do they survive? Rarely. Her hands were rough from bowstrings and winter work. She touched me only where treatment required. We go to the village when the snow weakens, she said. You already proved I cannot walk. You will ride the sled. I looked toward it. No. You survived poison, a bridge, and a river. Pride would be an embarrassing final opponent. I will not enter a village naked. Azra threw my torn leather coat across the furs. There. Your dignity has sleeves. A spare wool tunic hung from a peg. It had belonged to a smaller man. She cut the side seams and tied it loosely around my torso, before wrapping fur around my waist and legs. The arrangement preserved warmth and enough decency to meet strangers. Isra secured me to the sled. The storm weakened near midday. Cold sunlight reflected from the snow with enough force to hurt my eyes. Isra pulled the fur-lined hood over her blonde braid and stepped into the harness. The gray hound moved ahead. We left the shelter. The forest descended away from the gorge. Pines, spruce, and larch covered the slopes. Straight trunks rose everywhere, dense enough to supply houses, walls, bridges, and winter fuel for generations. I saw no proper road. Only a narrow sled trail cut between the trees. You move timber by hand? I asked. Most of it. No wagons? Wagons need roads and bridges. No sawmill? We have 3 axes that still hold an edge. Timber surrounded them, but hunger and poor tools kept it standing uselessly beyond their cabins. Isra glanced over her shoulder. What are you counting? Roof beam. You have not seen our roofs. I saw the hunting shelter. My grandfather built it. He understood winter. He also had 9 sons. How many remain? None. I let the silence remain. Isra leaned harder into the harness. The hound paused whenever the wind shifted between the trees. We crossed the warm stream on 2 logs tied together with old rope. One log had split along its center. Mud stains marked nearby trunks more than a meter above the bridge. How high does the spring flood rise? I asked. Isra pointed toward a low branch. Sometimes past that. You rebuild this crossing every year? Every year. A higher bridge would survive? A higher bridge needs cut stone, longer beams, and workers who are not hunting for supper. She understood the problem perfectly. She simply lacked the labor to solve it. The current beneath us remained strong despite the cold. A properly built wheel could turn through most of winter. I stored the location in my memory. We passed 6 snares. 4 were empty. 1 had been torn apart. The final trap held only a patch of rabbit fur. Deep paw prints crossed the trail. Each print was wider than my hand. Dire wolves? Yes. How old are the tracks? Isra stepped out of the harness and crouched beside them. Snow had softened the edges, but only slightly. They crossed before dawn. The hound's neck fur lifted. Which direction? I asked. Toward our western hunting line. Isra returned to the harness and increased her pace. The trail climbed a low ridge. The trees opened on the far side. The village occupied a shallow basin between the forest and a frozen lake. 29 cabins stood below. Only 15 produced smoke. Several empty homes had collapsed beneath snow. Others leaned behind doors that had not opened in years. 38 people? I asked. Isra nodded. The empty cabins belonged to families who died left or were taken by southern recruiters. The occupied homes were scarcely better. Snow-bowed white roofs. Smoke escaped through broken shingles. A crooked fence enclosed part of the settlement, but half the post had fallen. 3 wide gaps remained on the western side. There was no proper gate. No ditch, no watchtower. Wet firewood lay directly on the ground beneath hides that trapped moisture around it. Children carried buckets from a hole cut into the frozen lake. 2 waste pits stood uphill from the same water. Animal skins hung beneath a leaking roof. One shed served as storehouse workshop and butchering space. The healer's cabin stood near the center, barely 20 paces from the western breach. It was the largest structure in the village. That meant it contained 2 rooms and fewer holes than the others. The hound barked. Faces appeared behind shutters. 2 boys ran uphill, carrying short spears. They slowed when they saw me secured to the sled. "What happened?" the older one asked. "The river found a man," Isra said. The younger boy stared at my scars. "Is he dead?" Not enough to stop complaining. The boys moved behind the sled and helped push. Their thin boots had been patched with strips of rabbit hide. Neither wore gloves. Villagers emerged as we descended. I counted 4 adult men still capable of work. One lacked 2 fingers. Another walked with a stiff knee. A third held his left arm close to his chest. The strongest defenders I saw were Isra, 2 half-trained boys, and an injured man carrying a wood axe. An elderly woman opened the healer's cabin. Her white hair had been braided beneath a wool cap. "What have you brought this time?" "A patient." "We have patients." This one fell from high break. The healer examined my face, then the blood beneath the improvised clothing. "Bring him inside." Her cabin smelled of smoke-boiled herbs and old wool. Bundles of dried plants hung above a clay stove. 3 narrow beds stood behind patched curtains. Isra and the boys lowered the sled beside the fire. The healer cut away my outer bandage. River water entered this. "I cleaned it," Isra said. "You packed it correctly." The healer washed the wound and removed cloth darkened with blood. She closed only the upper edge with 2 loose stitches. "The lower section remains open until every trace of dirt comes out." "Sensible," I said. "You have experience with wounds?" "I have experience receiving them." She examined my ribs, shoulder, and hands. Then she lifted one eyelid, watched the pupil contract, and counted my pulse while I flexed the weakened finger. "One-sided numbness. Slow muscle response, no fever yet," she said. "Still, Vine?" "1 mouthful. Enough to weaken you for several days. I require fewer. The poison does not appear interested in your schedule." Isra leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for one breath. Exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. She had dragged me through a storm and eaten almost nothing since finding me. "Feed her first," I said. The healer looked toward Isra. "She disappears whenever bowls appear." "I hunt better when I am light," Isra said. "No one hunts better while starving." One boy returned carrying a wooden bowl. Steam rose from thin broth containing roots and several pieces of rabbit. He watched the meat while walking. The hunger in his face was too practiced to be recent. I accepted the bowl. The healer waited until I drank. Warm salt and fat reached my stomach. I swallowed half and held the bowl toward Isra. She did not take it. "You need the rest." "I need the person who dragged me here to remain standing." "The village gave that to you." "The village can watch us divide it." I held the bowl until she accepted. Isra drank 2 mouthfuls and passed the remainder to the boy. The healer allowed the decision. "How much food remains?" I asked. The cabin became quiet. 10 days at current portions," the healer said. "How long until the pass opens?" "At least 4 months. Stored roots? 2 baskets. Grain? None. Salt? Half a sack. Fishing?" "The lake has been poor since autumn." "Hunters?" Isra answered. "Me. 2 boys in training. 1 man who can still shoot from a seated position." "What happened to the others?" 11 died during the last year. 4 to monsters, 3 beneath an avalanche. 2 vanished on the western trail. 1 died of fever, and 1 beneath the collapsed roof. The village had lost skilled people faster than it could replace them. "What tools do you have?" 3 axes, Isra said. 2 hand saws with broken teeth. 1 splitting maul. Hammers, knives, and nails pulled from abandoned cabins. "No forge? No smith." I looked through the doorway at the waste pits above the lake. "Stop using those before the thaw. We know they are too close." Isra said. "Frozen ground prevents new pits. Build covered waste boxes downhill and move the contents by sled until spring softens the soil." The edge in her expression eased. She had expected criticism without a workable winter solution. "You have organized camps in colder places?" she asked. "I kept 12,000 soldiers fed through a 7-month campaign." The healer studied my face. She crossed to a shelf and pulled down a folded, smoke-stained victory notice. A trader wrapped our last salt delivery in this 2 summers ago. A rough ink portrait occupied the center. The artist had widened my jaw, removed half my scars, and invented a heroic expression I had never used. The healer held it beside my face. Wrath and calm. Both boys turned. The older one nearly dropped his spear. The warlord? The portrait is misleading. The healer lowered the paper. Why is Kavren's greatest commander bleeding inside my house? His fiancée and the crown prince threw him into the river, Isra said. She delivered the explanation like a report about a damaged trap. The younger boy looked toward the door. Will soldiers come? Not before spring, I said. Belden will spend the winter convincing them I am dead. You intend to return, the healer said. Yes. When? When I can cross the mountains without becoming another corpse beneath them. Isra pushed away from the wall. That answer sounds less foolish. I looked outside. 3 villagers struggled to move wet firewood beneath a leaking roof. Another roof bowed under heavy snow 20 paces away. Nobody had enough hands for both tasks. Empty the eastern cabin first, I said. Its center beam is bending. The healer raised one eyebrow. You have been here less than an hour. The roof has been failing longer. Isra examined it through the doorway. He's right. The beam bent yesterday. Move that family into this cabin's rear room, I said. Use abandoned doors as platforms beneath the firewood. One boy started toward the door. The healer caught his shoulder. Put down the spear before carrying messages. The boy obeyed. Cover only the top of the woodpile, I continued. Leave the sides open so moisture can escape. Isra studied me. You see all that from a bed? I spent 15 winters inspecting military camps. A horn sounded outside. One long note. A pause. 2 rapid blasts. Isra reached the doorway before the second note ended. What signal? I asked. Western breach. The gray hound charged outside. Another horn blast broke into a scream. Isra pulled her bow from the wall. 6 arrows remained in the quiver. The boys seized their spears. Keep the youngest children inside, she ordered. The older boy looked toward the fence. We need everyone. We need someone guarding the doors. Her voice allowed no argument. Isra stepped into the snow. Villagers ran toward the western fence, carrying axes, spears, and burning branches. A gray shape cleared the fallen posts. It stood nearly as high as a man's chest. Thick winter fur covered its shoulders, and pale bone ridges rose along its spine. A second dire wolf followed. 4 more moved among the trees. A larger 7th animal waited behind them. The blood dripping from my sled had probably led the pack the final distance. The first wolf struck the man with 2 missing fingers before he could brace his spear. Its shoulder threw him across the snow. Its jaws closed around his lower leg. Leather tore. Blood spread beneath the animal's muzzle. Isra released her first arrow. The shaft entered behind the wolf's front shoulder. It released the man and turned toward her. The second wolf slipped through the nearest gap and ran toward 2 women pulling a child between them. Isra fired again. Her arrow entered the side of its neck and shortened the leap. The wolf crashed into a woodpile but remained alive. I pushed the blankets aside. The healer stepped in front of me. You will tear the wound open. Prepare more cloth. You cannot cross the village. The breach is 20 paces away. I lowered my feet to the floor. My right leg trembled beneath me. A splitting axe rested beside the stove. Its handle was short and part of one blade corner had broken away. It remained heavy enough to kill. I took it in my left hand. The poison made my right grip unreliable. The healer caught my arm. You will collapse. Afterward, I moved through the doorway. Cold air struck the sweat across my body. A third wolf entered through the central gap. 3 more paced behind the broken fence while the scarred leader remained among the trees. The villagers had spread across open ground. They would be surrounded within seconds. Between the healer's cabin and the storehouse, I shouted. Spears in front, fire behind them. Several people turned toward me. I pointed with the axe. Move. The voice that had commanded armies returned before the strength in my body. Villagers dragged the wounded man toward the narrow lane between the buildings. 2 women carried burning branches behind them. The boys emerged with their spears despite Isra's order. I did not waste time sending them back. Brace the shafts against the ground, I said. Do not chase anything. The older boy planted his rear foot. The younger copied him. The third wolf charged the lane. It saw children and accelerated. The older boy's spear point shook. I stepped beside him. Hold. The wolf crossed half the distance. Hold. Its jaws opened. I drove my boot against the base of the spear as the wolf struck. The point entered through its chest. The impact threw the boy backward, but the grounded shaft carried most of the force into the snow. The wolf slid to a stop at my feet. It remained alive. I brought the axe down behind its skull. The chipped blade split bone. The boy stared at the dead animal. Pull your spear, I said. The others are still moving. Pain tightened beneath my ribs. Warm blood reached the fresh bandage. I kept my weight on the stronger leg. The first wounded wolf reached the lane. 3 villagers lowered their spear points together. It lunged. The weapons entered its chest and shoulder. A woman stepped from behind the line and struck its skull with the splitting maul. The animal stopped moving. The wolf beside the woodpile regained its feet. The hound rushed it, snapping at one rear leg and keeping its jaws away from the fleeing child. 2 men approached from opposite sides. One spear entered the wolf's throat. The other drove beneath its ribs. They forced it into the snow. 3 wolves were dead. The man they had dragged into the lane pressed both hands around his torn calf. The muscle had been opened almost to the bone. He would not hunt again that winter. Another wolf circled around the storehouse rather than approaching the spear line. Yisra saw it and climbed a stack of timber beside the wall. Her 3rd arrow entered its shoulder. The wound turned the animal away from the lane. It attacked the hound instead. The wolf's paw opened the hound's shoulder and threw it across the snow. Isra dropped from the timber stack with her knife drawn. She landed beside the wolf and drove the blade behind its jaw. The animal spun. One paw struck her thigh and threw her against the storehouse wall. Her knife remained buried in its neck. The wolf turned toward her. I left the lane. My right leg nearly folded on the first step. I used the axe handle as support and crossed the short stretch of open ground. The wolf lunged. Isra rolled beneath its jaws and caught the knife hilt. She pulled the blade sideways. Blood opened across its throat. The animal still reached for her. I struck the side of its skull with the axe. The wolf collapsed against my legs. The impact shifted my cracked ribs. I fell to one knee. Isra pushed the carcass away from us. You were told to stay inside. You were standing in the wrong place. I was beside it. It had a different opinion. A howl rolled through the trees. The remaining wolves stopped moving. The pack leader entered through the western gap. Its shoulders stood higher than the broken fence. Old scars crossed its muzzle, and one pale ridge had snapped near the spine. 2 younger wolves followed several paces behind it. 4 dire wolves lay dead inside the settlement. 3 remained alive. Back to the lane, I said. Isra pulled her knife from the carcass. You can barely stand. I only need to reach the cabins. She hooked one arm around my waist. Together we crossed the few remaining steps. The villagers had moved the wounded behind the spear line. The hound lay beside the healer, blood running from its shoulder. Drag 2 carcasses into the lane I ordered. The men seized the dead wolves by their rear legs. The bodies narrowed the passage until only one attacker could enter at a time. Raise the burning branches above the spear points, I said. Keep smoke in their faces. The women lifted the flames. Fire reflected inside the wolves' eyes. The pack leader stopped beyond spear range. It examined the carcasses, the smoke, and the braced weapons. Then it turned toward the open eastern side of the village. It will circle, Yisra said. Yes. The leader had tested the obvious path and found it too expensive. I looked toward an abandoned wood cart beside the storehouse. One wheel leaned at an angle, but the frame remained intact. Can you reach the timber stack again? Usra followed my gaze. I have 3 arrows. Use one on the leader. Keep the other 2 if the younger wolves rush the cabins. What are you doing? Giving it something easier to understand. I limped toward the cart. Isra caught my sleeve. You are bleeding through the tunic. The wolf cannot count bandages. She released me and climbed. I used the axe to cut the rope securing the cart's load. Split logs rolled across the snow. The noise drew the leader's attention. I dragged one dead wolf several paces beyond the lane and stood over it. The bandage around my ribs had turned red. The leader smelled blood weakness in the body of its packmate. Its head lowered. The 2 younger wolves spread behind it. Spears remain in the lane, I said. Nobody follows me. The leader began to run. My right leg trembled. I shifted the axe into both hands. The numb fingers could hold the lower grip for one swing. That would be enough. The leader crossed the open ground. Isra remained hidden above the edge of the timber stack. 20 steps, 15, 10. The wolf changed direction at the final moment. It had seen the axe. It veered toward my injured side. I let my right knee collapse. The animal committed to the lower target. Its jaws opened beside my shoulder. Isra released her fourth arrow. The shaft entered above the wolf's rear leg. The impact turned its body half a pace. I drove the axe upward beneath its jaw. The blade entered through soft tissue and struck the base of its skull. The leader's weight carried both of us backward. I released the handle and rolled beneath the falling body. Its jaws closed on empty snow. The carcass struck beside me. The final two wolves stopped. Villagers advanced from the lane with burning branches and leveled spears. Isra drew another arrow but did not release it. The surviving wolves turned and disappeared through the western breach. The wounded hound tried to follow. Isra dropped from the timber stack and caught its collar. Let them go. I pushed the dead leader away from my legs. It twitched once. I pulled the axe free and struck again. The movement stopped. 5 dire wolves lay inside the village. 2 had escaped into the forest. The villagers held formation until the last gray shapes vanished among the pines. Only then did their weapons begin to lower. The first injured man's calf had been torn badly enough to end his hunting for months. The hound's shoulder was open to the muscle. 1 spear shaft had split during the charge. 4 of Isra's arrows remained buried in wolves. No child had been touched. Isra pressed both hands against my side. Blood had soaked through the bandage and borrowed tunic. You opened the wound again. The wolves were inconsiderate. She looked ready to hit me. The healer reached us carrying fresh cloth. Inside, she ordered. First, move the carcasses away from the lake. The healer ignored me and pulled at my arm. I pointed toward the north side of the butchering shed. Lay them in a snow trench under shade. Do not open the spine until Isra identifies the scent glands. Isra nodded. The glands poison the meat if they burst. 2 watchers on the roofs, I continued. Nobody tracks the escaped pair before daylight? The villagers looked toward Isra. You heard him, she said. 2 men climbed onto occupied cabins. The boys gathered dropped spears and carried them toward the shed. Other villagers dragged the carcasses toward the shaded snow trench. The wounded man and hound were taken into the healer's cabin first. Isra inspected the dead wolves before following. If the glands are intact, 5 carcasses give us roughly 12 days of meat at thin portions, she said. Stored food? 10 days. 22 days. Better than 10. Still nowhere near 4 months. Inside the cabin, the healer cleaned my wound again. She replaced the packing and passed a needle through the loosened upper edge. Isra held my shoulder while the thread tightened. The injured man lay on the next bed. The wolf had missed the main artery, but torn muscle and damaged tendons would keep him from standing for weeks. The hound rested near the stove with its shoulder stitched and wrapped. 5 carcasses had bought 12 days of food. The attack had cost the village 1 mobile defender, most of Isra's arrows, a damaged spear, and more blood than it could afford. I lay back and counted what remained. 38 people, 15 occupied cabins, 3 usable axes, 2 damaged saws, 22 days of food if the wolf meat proved safe. 4 months before the pass opened. A fence with 3 gaps. 2 escaped predators that now understood the village's defenses. Belden and Neris waited beyond the mountains. They believed the river had erased me. I wanted to return south immediately. I wanted Nerise to see my face before I killed her. Wanting something did not create a road through winter mountains. I had no horse armor, weapon-proof supplies, or reliable route. Returning alone would give Belden another opportunity to finish his work. It might also lead his soldiers toward the woman and village that had saved me. Azra tightened the clean bandage. You are not crossing the mountain soon. No. What will you do? I looked through the doorway. Villagers braced fresh logs across the western breaches. A woman raised the wet firewood onto abandoned doors. The 2 boys carried unbroken spearheads toward the workshop shed. These people had possessed 10 days of food. They had still shared a bowl with me. Cavern's nobles possessed palaces, armies, and winter stores large enough to feed cities. They had chosen poison. I will stay until the roofs hold, I said. Until the food lasts and that fence can survive without my blood on it. Isra studied me. That may take longer than spring. Then I leave later. You still intend to return south? Yes. To kill them? Yes. She did not ask me to forgive anyone. Her eyes moved toward the blood across the village snow. What happens tomorrow? At first light, we count every tool, every able hand, and every mouth. I pointed through the doorway. We clear snow from the occupied roofs. We raise the firewood. We close the uphill waste pits and build covered boxes downhill. And the fence? I look toward 2 straight pines beyond the western breach. Those come down after the roofs are safe. Isra followed my hand. What are they for? The first gate. Wood scraped across shingles before dawn. The sound dragged me awake inside Aldra's cabin. A broad board moved over the roof above, pushing packed snow toward the eaves. Someone shouted outside. A heavy sheet of snow struck the ground, hard enough to shake the wall. They had begun with the roofs. Good. I tried to turn onto my right side. Pain beneath my ribs stopped me halfway. The reopened dagger wound burned beneath its bandage, while 2 cracked ribs made every deep breath expensive. Grit slept near the stove with one shoulder wrapped in clean cloth. The greyhound raised its head when I moved. The man in the next bed opened his eyes. The dire wolf had torn his calf almost to the bone, and his injured leg rested on folded blankets. Neither of us looked ready for work. Aldra Nem sat between our beds, replacing the dressing around his leg. "You are awake," she said. "I heard the roof. You heard people following the order you gave before collapsing. How long was I asleep?" "Most of the night." She tightened the fresh cloth around the injured man's calf. His face hardened, but he made no sound. "What is your name?" I asked him. "Karen Old. You hunted before yesterday?" "Since I could hold a bow." "You will not hunt again this winter." His eyes shifted toward the wall. "I know. You can still repair spear shafts, sharpen trap stakes, strip sinew, and teach children how not to ruin a knife." Karen looked at his wrapped leg. "That is not hunting. It is work the village needs." He considered that without answering. Aldra pointed one stained finger toward me. "You are also forbidden from standing. Does that order improve when you point?" "No." The door opened before I could test her patience further. Isra entered carrying a wooden roof scraper. Snow covered her boots and fur-lined shoulders. Her pale blonde braid remained tucked beneath her hood, though loose strands clung to her face. She set the scraper beside the door. "The Eastern family is outside," she said. "Most of them." "Most?" The mother went back for 6 clay cups. "Leave the cups," I told her. She listened. She informed me that one belonged to her dead husband. That meant no. I pushed one elbow beneath me. Aldra pressed me back with 2 fingers against my shoulder. "You stay there. The eastern roof will not wait for my recovery. The people clearing it possess eyes. They also slept beneath it yesterday." Usra looked from me to Aldra. Then she dragged the hide-covered sled through the doorway. I stared at it. "No. You commanded wolves from a bed," Isra said. "You can command snow from a sled." Aldra approved immediately. The 2 women wrapped me in furs, lifted me with humiliating efficiency, and lowered me onto the same runners that had carried me from the river. Grit watched from beside the stove. "It appears pleased," I said. "Grit enjoys sensible decisions." I saw it eat frozen entrails. It still has standards. Isra fastened a blanket across my legs and pulled me outside. Cold air struck my face. The storm had passed, leaving a pale sky and snow bright enough to hurt my eyes. Villagers stood beside 3 occupied cabins, using long boards to pull snow from the roofs in controlled strips. Ropes crossed each roof ridge. People on opposite sides braced the lines, keeping the scrapers from dragging anyone beneath the falling snow. Children waited beyond the work area. Someone had listened carefully. The eastern cabin stood near the lake. Its center beam bowed beneath the remaining snow. A dark split ran along the timber's underside. 2 women carried bedding through its doorway. A girl hurried behind them with a smoking cooking pot. The mother remained inside. An older man waited beside the door with one hand resting on a carved stick. His right knee would not bend fully, but his shoulder still carried the shape of a lifelong carpenter. "You noticed the beam from Aldra's bed," he said. "I noticed the roof sagging around it." "Hovik Brast. Rathan Column." "I know." He looked toward the cabin. "We braced that beam twice." "With what?" "Green poles." "Too narrow. We used what we had." His voice carried no excuse, only fact. I studied the nearest abandoned cabin. Half its roof had fallen years ago, but 2 heavy rafters remained beneath the western wall. "Can those rafters come out safely?" "2 can. The 3rd holds the corner. Take the 2 after this family is clear." "For this roof." "For Aldra's cabin and the communal kitchen." Hovik frowned. You intend to abandon this one? The beam has already decided. A woman emerged carrying a wooden crate. Usra followed with 3 clay cups tucked beneath one arm. I saved half the treasury, Isra said. The mother glared at her. My husband shaped those. Then keep them outside the building, trying to crush them, I said. The woman looked toward the bowed roof. A quiet crack traveled through the center beam. Hovik raised his voice. Everyone back. People moved away. The mother clutched the crate against her chest while Isra guided her across the snow. For several breaths, the cabin remained standing. 2 villagers looked toward me as though I had invented the danger to frighten them. Snow slid from the northern side of the roof. The weight shifted. The center beam split. Half the roof collapsed into the cabin with a deep wooden crack. Broken shingles, snow, and smoke filled the doorway. 1 clay cup rolled from beneath the wall and stopped near the mother's boots. She bent, picked it up, and held it against her chest. Nobody praised me. The crushed roof had already made the point. Hovik turned toward the abandoned cabin. Which rafter first? Aldra's roof holds the wounded, I said. Start there. He called for 2 workers. That became the first order people followed without checking Isra's expression afterward. A long, low cabin stood beside the central fire. Its front room served as both meeting hall and communal kitchen. A broad hearth filled one wall, while benches could be moved whenever displaced families needed shelter. Aldra ordered me placed beside the hearth. Yisra, Hovik, and 2 household elders remained after the others returned to the roofs. One elder was the broad-shouldered woman who had killed a dire wolf with the splitting maul. She introduced herself as Bressa Quarn. The second was a trapmaker named Sadar Drool. His damaged knee forced him to sit, but his hands never stopped testing the cord tied around his walking stick. Bressa folded her arms. You saved people yesterday. I helped. You also arrived tied to a sled. I noticed. We cannot hand the village to every wounded stranger who kills a wolf. That would be an inefficient form of government. Bressa did not smile. Good. Sadar rubbed one thumb across the cord. What are you asking for? 7 days. Isra looked toward me. 7 days of what? Emergency authority over labor ration. Priorities, sanitation, and defense. Bressa's jaw tightened. You have known us one night. I know you have 22 days of food. 3 usable axes, 14 occupied roofs still standing, and a fence wolves crossed without slowing. That does not make you our ruler. I did not ask to become one. I pointed toward the workers clearing snow beyond the doorway. Follow the plan for 7 days. At the end, decide whether I improved anything worth keeping. Aldra set down her bowl of boiled cloth. I decide whether a body is healthy enough to work. Yes. Isra decides whether the mountain route is safe. Yes. Hovik tapped his stick against the floor. I decide how timber is cut and joined. You decide the method. I decide which danger the structure must solve. Bressa looked toward the western barricades. And defense? You control everyone holding a weapon inside the settlement. I followed your orders yesterday. You also held the lane after I left it. Sedar glanced at Isra. She gave a small nod. 7 days, Bressa said. After that, we meet again. Agreed. 5 people accepted the arrangement because winter was already pressing against their roofs. That was enough authority for 1 week. I asked every household to bring 1 stone for each person sleeping beneath its roof. They placed the stones on a dire wolf hide spread across the meeting hall floor. 38 stones represented the village. I added 1 for myself, 39 mouths. The remaining stores and 5 wolf carcasses could provide 22 days of thin rations, including the day already beginning. That calculation allowed no spoilage illness or unexpected mouths. I began asking what each pair of hands could do. Hovik could shape beams, repair sleds, fit joints, build simple wheels, and teach others where an axe should strike. His knee prevented roof work, but a bench required no climbing. Kelda Prawn carried a curved hide scraper at her belt. She had spent years tanning skins, stitching leather, and rendering animal fat without burning it. Ulvin Turn tapped 1 cracked cooking pot with his knuckle and identified 3 weaknesses in its clay. He repaired stove bricks and shaped household pottery. Rava Kel brought a fishing cord marked with knots. Each knot showed a different depth beneath the frozen lake. Sadar loosened the cord around his walking stick and formed a working snare before anyone finished introducing him. His daughter Sayla assisted him and knew the Western Trail better than anyone except Isra. Sayla spoke only when I asked how many people slept beneath her roof. 2 now. Who was the third? My brother. Sidar's hand stopped moving. The Western Raiders took him during last winter's tribute, he said. Did he return? No. I remembered the answer. Karen could not stand, but his hands still knew. Arrows, spear shafts, traps, and every mistake the two adolescent hunters had learned from one another. A seated archer named Dovin could strike a target from a roof, though an old hip injury prevented long patrols. Several women could sew layered winter clothing. The oldest villagers could scrape hides, mend nets, sort meat, supervise children, and teach skills that would otherwise die with them. The settlement possessed knowledge. Hunger kept forcing that knowledge into the forest, one hunter at a time. I arranged the stones into working groups. 7 villagers could manage heavy labor for part of a day. 11 could complete lighter work. 8 possessed useful seated skills. 6 needed to cook treat wounds, supervise children, and maintain the occupied cabin. The youngest and weakest could carry kindling twist cord, clean bones, fetch marked water, and assist under supervision. Bressa pointed toward my stone. Where does that one go? I placed it beside Aldra's medicine bowl. Expensive problem. A few people laughed. Aldra did not. The roof team remained under Hovig. Kelda controlled hides, sinew, and fat. Olvin inspected every stove and chimney. Rava marked the clean route to the lake hole. Sidar supervised spear repairs, defensive stakes, and alarms from a seated bench. Bressa took charge of the central fighting lane and every weapon inside the village. Isra controlled hunting, tracking, weather calls, monster processing, and all work beyond the existing fence. I assigned priorities and checked results. Aldra retained the right to put me back in bed. By midday, every occupied roof still standing had been cleared. 3 received salvaged braces. 2 more families moved into the rear of the meeting hall because their cabins would not survive another heavy fall. Workers raised the wet firewood onto abandoned doors supported by stones. Hides covered the tops of the stacks while both sides remained open to air. Rava closed the paths near the uphill waste pits. Red strips cut from a ruined blanket marked the clean water route to the lake. Blood and drinking water would no longer cross the same ground. Olvin and 2 older children built covered waste boxes downhill from the lake. Boards from an abandoned cabin formed the sides. Clay sealed the seams, and old sled runners allowed each box to move while the ground remained frozen. Ash and dry moss waited beneath a small roof beside them. Workers packed the old uphill pits with snow and covered them with crossed boards. Proper pits would wait for the thaw. Isra dragged me toward the 5 direwolf carcasses. They lay inside a shaded snow trench north of the storehouse workshop. Clean boards covered the bodies and packed snow sealed the edges against scavengers. The building beside them stored food tools, hides, and anything else the village could not afford to lose. A roofed butchering area extended from its northern side. Yesra knelt beside the smallest wolf and opened the hide below its shoulders. A dark sack appeared beneath a layer of pale fat. The upper scent gland, she said. Another lies near the hips. Break either, and the stink enters the meat. Does it kill? It causes vomiting and fever unless the meat is washed, boiled, and smoked repeatedly. Remove it intact. Isra cut around the gland and sealed it inside a clay jar. Kelda watched once. Then Yisra handed her the knife. Kelda's first cut moved slowly. The gland came free without tearing. By the 3rd carcass, Isra only watched her hands. The wolves produced 7 deep baskets of usable meat. Each basket required 2 people to carry. By my campaign estimate, that could stretch across 12 thin days for 39 mouths. Kelda filled nearly 2 buckets with fat. The hides could become clothing bedding, roof patches, or trade goods. Sinew would repair bows and reinforce lashings. Large bones went toward handles and wedges. Smaller pieces would become hooks, needles, buttons, and pins. 4 arrows came out of the carcasses. 2 remained complete. 1 shaft had broken below the feathers, while the 4th had split against bone. Isra possessed 4 working arrows and 2 iron heads awaiting new shafts. The village had no smokehouse. Frozen trenches would preserve meat while the weather remained hard, but one warm spell or hungry animal could ruin the entire gain. I examined the ground north of the storehouse. Build the smoking shelter here. Hovik followed my gaze. Freestanding? Yes. Leave a walking gap between it and the storehouse wall. That requires more roofing. Use 2 rafters from the collapsed eastern cabin and 2 from an empty home. Ulvin tapped a cracked clay basin. I can line this thick enough to hold coals. Isra pointed toward the lower stream. Alder grows along the bank. Cut branches, I said. Leave the roots holding the soil. She glanced toward the old flood marks. You noticed. I noticed the bridge standing below them. 4 salvaged rafters formed the smoking shelter. Hovik marked each joint from his bench while younger workers shaped the wood. The damaged saws tore more than they cut. 2 adults spent several minutes forcing one blade through a wrist-thick pole. A water-powered sawmill would eventually change the valley. For now, we needed roofs, food, and a gate. The smoking shelter stood before darkness. 3 racks hung above Ulvin's repaired coal basin. Wet alder chips produced steady smoke beneath the sloped roof. Kelda cut the meat into narrow strips. Isra used a limited amount of salt on the thickest pieces nearest the heat. The remaining meat returned to the snow trench and would rotate through the racks. Children carried clean bones toward Sidar's bench. Unusable organs were sealed beneath boards inside a marked snow trench beyond the fence. They would be burned at first light. The dangerous glands remained inside clay jars far from the cabins. That evening, the communal pot held root scraps of direwolf meat and enough rendered fat to coat the surface. Every bowl received the same measured portion. Aldra gave me more than the others. I objected once. She added another spoonful. After the meal, 21 days of food remained. The fever arrived after midnight. I woke with smoke inside my nose and Nerissa standing beside the stove in her blood-stained wedding dress. She held the silver cup. I reached for her throat. My hand closed around empty air. The vision vanished. Isra sat beside the fire with her bow across her knees. Grit slept near her boots. You were speaking, she said. What did I say? Nothing useful. She poured water from the pot, drank once, and handed me the cup. I accepted it without making her prove anything else. The realization came after I swallowed. Aldra removed the bandage from my side. Redness surrounded the upper stitches. The lower opening drained cloudy fluid into the packing. Shallow infection, she said. For now. She cleaned it with boiled water and bitter spirits. Pain drove my fingers into the blanket. You do not leave this bed tomorrow, Aldra said.